Welcome to the second unit on the Open Education Science module. I'm going to be talking about the 4 steps of Open Education Science. In this first one, we're going to be discussing open design and pre-registration. My name is Jose Luis Perez. I'm a senior researcher at the University of Murcia working in learning analytics, and I hope that you enjoy this travel with me. So the first thing that I wanted to say is that research design is probably one of the most important parts of any research study. However, we see that very often the practice of the design is very obscure. Researchers are not very detailed in what they did. This might beg the question of what came first, the hypothesis, the design, or the analysis. In the scientific procedure, we should have an hypothesis, then we design a study that will allow us to confirm or reject that hypothesis, and then we finally conduct the analysis to verify the hypothesis. However, very frequently there are bad practices, like we use data and then we analyze data, and then based on that or the results of our analysis, we'll make some hypothesis that fits the data. That's a bad practice. And in fact, 33% of the authors have admitted to have done bad practices such as this one and others. And this number might be in fact higher because people often don't report things that are bad for them, or they might feel them like shame. So the idea of open design is to actually give a truthful account of the study process and how it changed over time, so that we are more transparent about the process. One of the methods that we have to do this is what is called preregistration. In preregistration, we actually document and share our research plans and research design before we actually conduct the study. That way, we have a clear account of what was designed before we conduct the study. And now, during this unit, I'll be talking a bit about the methods and tools that we might use to accomplish this goal. So again, the idea about pre-registration is to be very transparent about the process. And we have 2 ways to do that. The first one is the degree of transparency in the pre-registration. That means which people can access the pre-registration. Is it completely public to all the researchers and even citizens in the world? Is it completely private? Perhaps you shared the register design only with reviewers and only with your collaborators. And the other dimension is the completeness of the pre-registration. Did we register only the research hypothesis? Did we say what statistical analysis we're going to conduct? Or we even sometimes could pre-register the entire code that we are going to execute on the data. So this gives a wide spectrum of different pre-registration levels. There are some examples of very nice tools that we can use to perform more open designs. For example, Open Science Framework facilitates that a lot, or we had Register Report. This is a new form of publication that we'll be discussing more in depth a bit later. Also, we have some registries that try to aggregate register studies from different areas so that we can sort of get an idea of how these studies were conducted and try to have more confirmatory meta research. So given the transparency and the completeness of the pre-registration, we can have a full spectrum of pre-registration levels. We could have, for example, very public pre-register studies that are available to everyone, but maybe they are not very complete because they just said what was the original hypothesis. On the other side, we could have very complete pre-registration studies where you even include the code that you want to execute, but maybe they are private and you don't share that with anyone else. If the optimal options are registered reports that we'll be discussing in the next slide, and the opposite and bad option is closed science, which basically means that no one knows for real what is the research study that you conducted initially. There are a series of also new trends One of them is to provide more supplementary materials like code, data. So I have this GitHub repository as an example from a paper that I published with Justin Drake. In this paper, we indicate how to get the data that we are using. We indicate what are the variables that we are using, and we say how to reproduce the analysis. So we have included the code that if they get the data, they could execute. For example, this is a R Markdown script to reproduce the visualizations that we use in the study. And this other one would be IPython notebook that also include the visualization, the data processing that we are collecting. And as you can see here, this includes the entire code and the output of the code. So it makes the process much more transparent than not doing all this. Another new trend that is being considered is to offer new benefits to authors. For example, we could say that authors that publish in registered reports and with applying to good practices in open education science, they would have higher weight into the tenure programs and getting promotions and so on. So there are different ways to do this, but this is definitely one of the main ways to make people do things that you would like them to do, is to offer benefits. And then we have this new publication format, which are called registered reports. In the registered reports, the review procedure is different. We have an idea, we develop the idea, we write about it, and then we make a study design. And then we submit to the study design to a journal that is accepting this type of publication of registered reports. And then we have a first stage of the peer review that is based on the study design. If the reviewers accept your study, then you go ahead and collect and analyze the data only after your design has been approved. So you don't change the design. Once you have analyzed the data, you can write the report. And then comes a second stage of the peer review, which is about the actual results of the study. Finally, you publish your report. This way, we have a validation of both the study, you don't change the study, and then you create the report based on the data that you collected and apply the methods in your study. A much transparent process that also facilitates publishing new results when your results are not very amazing or they simply failed. So there are a series of advantages and disadvantages in this process. The first one, as I said just now, is that it can help to conduct more confirmatory research. One of the issues is that when researchers don't find interesting results, it's harder to publish those results, and hence researchers keep looking for these interesting results, trying to find something that is interesting and will be appealing to the reviewers that are revising your paper. And so this way we plan the analysis before that happens, and we avoid this p-hacking or looking for the interesting result, which can often lead to false positives and bad practices. One of the issues is that it represents an important investment of time for the researcher. And we currently have a publish-or-perish culture where academics are forced to publish as much as they can so that they can get promotions and compete against other researchers in the field and so on. And so for a researcher to be forced to spend an additional 20 or 30% more of the time in preparing all these contents for having a more transparent and open science represents a high amount of time. And although this gets much better over time, once you introduce these practices in your research flow, it's still, if we don't change the culture to valuing more quality over quantity, then it's going to be hard to make these changes. Finally, some people think that it does limit the creativity of the researchers, but in fact it does not. Instead, what you can do is differentiate between which one were your original plans versus which plans or decisions came after starting to do this analysis. So it doesn't necessarily limit the creativity, it just differentiate between the original study and the plans that, the analysis that you did after the initial results. These are the references that I use for this presentation. And I hope that you like it. Remember that you have an exercise coming up, and next unit we'll be seeing open data. See you.